So if you would love to be a part of that tonight, be a part of that conversation, hear what the leadership has come up with, we would invite you to be back here at 6 o'clock, and we will not take up much of your time this evening. We want to just kind of disseminate some information for you as we're all praying together, okay? We are, as I said earlier this morning to the other services, are rounding third base and heading into home here in Ecclesiastes, all right? It's been a summer of wisdom literature for us with Ecclesiastes. And if you'll remember, the wisdom literature, Proverbs, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, the book of Job, all of those fall in those categories. And Eric and I were actually talking about this earlier this morning. The more you read wisdom literature, and indeed the whole Bible, the more you read it, the more its layers of meaning come alive for you. You can read something numerous times and come back to it. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying the meaning of the passage changes. It's always been the same meaning. It's just like a new layer comes open to you and you're going, oh, I didn't catch that the first time through here. And so one of the things that I've tried to do as we've been going through this series is try to unpack some of these proverbs for you. Sometimes that requires me being willing to go back to like commentaries and other pastors and go, what do these guys think that he's trying to say here? Because some of these are kind of different kind of sayings. They're different kind of phrases. Some because they're current for that time and age. Maybe others just because Solomon was way smarter than I am. And so the things he had to say sometimes require us to unpack some things. For instance, today in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 1, we're going to start. It starts off with this. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil ferment and stink. Now, how many of you anticipated coming to church this morning and talking about dead flies? Matt was all prepared. Way to go, Matt. Yeah, so we're at this conversation here, and first 8 chapters of the book, Solomon has over and over again emphasized for us that life without God is meaningless. He's used that word over and over and over again. He keeps talking about the meaningless state of life without God. And then he gets to this place where he recognizes, the only way to have any meaning is to pursue a life that pursues God, that submits to God. Why? Because every single one of us have the same end destination, and that end destination is death. So that's where we're going to wind up. So it's who we follow, who we live for in that meantime that brings meaning to our lives. Chapter 9, the tone begins to turn a little bit because Solomon begins to look at the purpose that's found in life by choosing the righteous way, by choosing the right way there is in life. And so through chapter 11, we see some of these wisdom pieces that he's bringing out, these proverbs that he's using to try to teach us. And one of the important things he's teaching us today is the difference between the wise life versus the foolish life. In essence, he's saying, if we all know we've got a certain amount of time here, and that time is limited, why don't we all choose to live wisely and make the most of the opportunities we've been given, to get the most out of the life that we have here, as short as it may be? You're going to have to follow me because it's not connecting again. We've had lots of technical issues here this morning, so not the least of which is a pastor. Okay. So beginning in verse 1, he says, dead flies make a perfumer's oil ferment and stink. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise person's heart goes to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. There are only 2 ways to walk in this life. Solomon's making that point for us. There is the right way and the wrong way, the righteous way and the way that is selfish, that chooses our own desires. Today, he calls it the wise versus the foolish path in life. Any conversation there is about middle ground or compromise really doesn't exist. Because the Bible is clear from beginning to end. When you pursue God, when you follow God, it's total submission under His authority, or it's no submission at all. Right? If you choose to live selfishly, to pursue your own path, then you really haven't chosen God at all. I think it was John MacArthur who said that any life and conversation about salvation that says there is room for sin in it is not really a true salvation at all. Because salvation is at its base, its essence, it is about freeing us from sin. So when we come to this idea of salvation, when we come to this idea of sovereign grace over us, it's about total, complete surrender to Him. And we allow no room for sin in our lives. So we're choosing the right life, the righteous life. Many times when I speak at hospitals, when I go on those occasions to lead conferences there, one of the things I talk about is that you can build spend an entire life building a reputation of good, and it only takes about 15 seconds of compromise to bring it all down. The same thing is true for you in your life. When you choose God, when you choose a path of righteousness, it is an ongoing intentionality about pursuing the things of God, pursuing the things of Christ, pursuing the righteous way, because when you let down your guard, everything around it crumbles. And you allow sin into your life in a way that you don't want, that you don't desire for yourself. So the question I want to ask you here this morning is, are you a Christian? Going back to what Eric said, are you ready for Christ if that time comes? Are you a disciple? Now, as I ask that question and you begin to ponder the answer, if your response is, oh, back when I was 7, I went to kids camp or vacation Bible school and I prayed a prayer there, or if your answer is, oh, back 10 years ago, I prayed a prayer with my pastor, yeah, I'm a Christian, then I would argue with you that you might not be a Christian. You might have had a moment back then. Because being a Christian is not what happened back then. It's about what's going on every single day of your life. If you're a true follower of Jesus Christ, there should be an ongoing, active, dynamic interchange between you and your Savior. There should be conversations about, here's what He's doing in my life now. Here's how He's leading me now. Here's what's happening with me now. If all you've got to hang on to is a point back there, then you got to question whether or not you're really day by day a disciple who is following Jesus Christ. I know that makes many of you uncomfortable. Good. Because I want you to ponder your relationship with Christ in such a way that you're constantly examining, how do I keep going deeper? How do I keep pursuing this dynamic thing that God desires for me and with me? So, verse 3, he says, even when the fool walks along the road, his heart lacks sense, and he shows everyone he is a fool. If the ruler's anger rises up against you, you don't leave your post, for calmness puts great offenses to rest. A guy walking down the middle of the road screams at us that something is wrong. Somebody's not thinking rightly, okay? If we were to walk out of church in a minute and we saw a guy walking down the middle of the road right now, we would probably call 911 and say, hey, somebody's not in their right mind. They're in the middle of traffic walking down the road. In essence, that's kind of what he's saying here. Somebody who chooses to put his life in danger in that way, who doesn't choose one way or the other, is actually compromising in such a way that he is not thinking logically about his existence. It's almost as if he thinks he's indestructible, or that he can't be brought down, that he doesn't think he will die, and that somehow he's going to avoid the reality that we all have, that there is a judgment that faces every single one of us. At some point, you have to choose. It takes me back to a phrase, or a parable, I guess you would. Actually, a proverb, not a parable, that my grandfather used to say all the time. He used to say, the only thing in the middle of the road is a yellow streak, and if you're standing there, it's running right up your back. Now, it took me about 10 years to figure out what in the world he was talking about, so I hope you get it this morning. The truth is, if you're unwilling to choose a path, then you're afraid and you're a coward and unwilling to make commitments. You're unwilling to make a stand for anything. And so, in a sense, I think that's what Solomon's kind of saying to us. Foolishness says, I'm not going to choose. And when you don't choose, you've chosen. Okay? Verse 5. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, an error proceeding from the presence of the ruler. The fool is appointed to great heights, but the rich remain in lowly positions. I have seen slaves on horses, but princes walking on the ground like slaves. We live in a maddening world where right now sin, debauchery, and immorality are celebrated regularly. I remember as a kid that my heroes, especially growing up in elementary school, my heroes used to be guys like presidents, generals from history, because I loved history, even upstanding people in my own local community who I recognize as being good people who did good things. Today, we spend more time celebrating things that just kind of really shock me and rattle my brain a little bit, right? I mean, we don't talk about things like George Washington being a hero anymore. We celebrate LeBron James. Okay, the guy's 6'7" and can dunk a 10-foot basketball goal. Whoop-de-doo. So why do we care what he thinks about China? Right? Or how about this one? Johnny Depp's marriage. I mean, how many hours of network TV was devoted to the trial between Johnny Depp and whatever her name was, right? And people literally were staying awake to see what the day's results were. What happened with Johnny Depp's divorce trial today or whatever it was? I don't even follow it. Why do we care so much about those kinds of things? How many hours of Will Smith getting slapped at the award ceremony did we watch over and over and over again as if the world cares? But here's the problem. The world cares. They're more concerned about those things than some of the things that really should be occupying our time. Homeless people, people going without food, people in other countries who need to be relieved from wars that are going on and on and on. All the things that we could be talking about, and we're talking about whether or not LeBron James feels one way or another versus what's going on in the league. And I fault us as parents because we don't give much direction to our kids these days. Let's just be honest, okay? We allow our kids to pick role models that many times I feel like we should be saying to them, hey, maybe you need to rethink who it is you're modeling your life after. As parents, maybe it's time that we started saying to our kids, I don't want you dressing like that girl because that girl doesn't dress the way a young Christian lady should. Or guys, I don't want you modeling that behavior because as a young man who follows Christ, you should be more respectful, more kind, more considerate. You shouldn't have that kind of heart. He doesn't need to be your role model. But too many times we're so concerned about the popularity of our kids, or we're more worried about whether or not they're going to be the one who's picked for the team, or those kinds of things, and we allow those kinds of influences in the lives of our kids to keep us from directing them because we're afraid we're going to offend, we're going to upset, we're going to make them unhappy with us. Immorality is being celebrated regularly on our entertainment as well. This week, I don't know if you saw the announcement that the Hulu channel, August the 25th, is releasing a new show called Little Demon. It's about a young lady. It's a cartoon, by the way. It's a little cartoon about a young lady who goes to a middle school, and because she gets bullied there at school, discovers in her rage that she has certain powers because her mother had sex with Satan in the past. And so she is literally a child of Satan. And this is a cartoon that's going to be put on, supposedly for adult entertainment, but you know who will be watching. This is the kind of stuff that's being celebrated in our country. I mean, it's literally a mockery of who God is. It's a mockery of what Christianity stands for. I think we've got to be really, really careful because we're trying to keep one foot in the house of God and the other foot in the world, thinking that somehow we can maintain both of those. And again, God's righteousness demands pure holiness. And until we get this understanding of what God's holiness really looks like, we don't understand the depth of what our sin looks like. So I encourage us all, every single one of us, to read more, to look into the Word more, especially in the Psalms, and read about the holiness of God, the purity of God, and what He desires for us, and what He expects for us as a path that's a righteous life. Another story that came out this week that kind of shocked me, an 80-year-old lady in Washington. I don't know if any of you saw this. She'd been a regular swimmer at the YMCA for years to get exercise, and a couple of weeks ago, or whenever it was, walked into the girls' locker room. Said girls, clearly on the door. Walked into the girls' locker room, and there was a guy in there dressed as a woman who was standing there watching the little girls get undressed after their swimming classes. She went to the administration of the YMCA and complained, and they banned her from the YMCA for life because of her unwillingness to be tolerant of others. We've lost our minds, y'all. Amen. We've lost our minds. And it's not, it comes down to this. It comes down to the fact that we've just taken our eyes off God as the standard of what's good and right and righteous and true. And we've started looking at everything else in the world as the standard. Let me just keep on. Verse 8. He says, the one who digs a pit may fall into it, and the one who breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. The one who quarries stones may be hurt by them. The one who splits logs may be endangered by them. In essence, what he's saying here is that the truth is that none of us really knows what's going to happen next. This world is a very unexpected place. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. You break open a wall and a snake bites you, right? You try to do the right thing, and sometimes it doesn't come back to you in the right way. There's just such an unpredictable nature about the world in the future. But let me keep reading, because he says, if the axe is dull and one does not sharpen its edge, then one must exert more strength. However, the advantage of wisdom is that it brings success. If the snake bites before it is charmed, then there is no advantage for the charmer. Use that one at work tomorrow. I'm going to come back to that and unpack that a little bit for you. But here's the thing. What he's saying, again, is that life is unpredictable and we have no control of it. But there is a wiser way to approach life when you understand you can't control it, but you can intentionally live it in a certain direction. You can make paths and choose choices that you want to make. It's kind of like what he said over the last few weeks. You can't do anything about your past. You can't control your future, but you can control how you respond and how you act and what your attitude and what your choices are in the moment you are in. And therein, you make the wise decision on how to live life. I love his example of the guy who's cutting down the tree. The axe becomes dull and he can choose two things. He can choose foolishly, keep hitting harder with a dull axe and hope that something happens, or take a few seconds to sharpen the blade so that the work is easier and the production of what he's doing is much more successful. You know, I have learned the course of my life that the goals of my life now as a 55-year-old guy are much different than what they were when I was 20 years old. Why? Because I have lived life and my experiences in life and the experiences of friends of mine and family members of mine have taught me some very valuable lessons about what's really, really important. There was a time in my life where I wanted certain things, and those things were, in essence, what Solomon has been talking about, this idea of grasping the wind, reaching for things that just you can't hold on to, things that really, in the long and short of it, they just really don't matter, right? I had 3 goals coming out of high school, or 3 future goals coming out of high school. One of them was to go be an architect. And I got the opportunity to go to Georgia Tech to play baseball. They invited me to walk on up there, but God called me into ministry, so I had to reroute that plan. The second goal was to play third base for the Atlanta Braves. Still waiting for that phone call. And then the third goal, when I got towards the end of my senior year, was to fly F-15 planes off of aircraft carriers. I wanted to fly for the Air Force. And that was like when it was really cool before Tom Cruise, right? Okay? I was cool before he was. Amen. And that was kind of my goal in life. And then one day this recruiter comes in, he sits down with me, and he goes, "You can't fly fighters for us." And I was like, "Why not?" He said, "Because your vision's not good enough." And I'm like, "But I wear contacts. Does that not help?" And he goes, "No, you have to be able to see past the end of the airplane in order to fly my plane. People don't like you flying our multi-million-dollar planes with your vision." And I said, "So what are my options?" He said, "Fly a helicopter." I'm like, "Aren't those expensive too?" And he said, "Yeah, but they fly slower." So, there was just kind of that whole conversation. Well, I just finally decided, well, I don't want to do that either. And then, as I said, God kind of stepped in and chose my life. But you can sit here, you can kind of trace all those things, and you can go, man, my mind would be blown thinking about the different paths my life could have taken along the way by choosing different things. The great philosopher Darius Rucker talked about it in his song when he said, if it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have had this. If I'd missed the stoplight, if I hadn't taken the job, if I'd stayed with that girlfriend, all those different choices along the way. And I think back at those things and go, you know what? In those moments, I couldn't have even begun to understand what those choices might have meant for me down the road. Many of you, all of you, in fact, would be able to say the same thing. What if I'd chosen this job instead of that one? Half of you are from California in here. What if you'd stayed in that state and decided not to move to Tennessee, right? Or what if we had chosen not to have that third child or not to adopt the one we adopted? All of those things lead to incredibly life-changing decisions for us. What I'm trying to say to you, though, is this. If you're 20, 30 years old here today and you're holding on to certain dreams, ask yourself 20 years from now, is it really going to matter? Because then what you find is that you boil down life to the essence of what's really, really important. Nobody stumbles into greatness. It happens because of intentionality. It happens because you make good choices. It's not just enough to want to. You've got to have the desire to carry it out. Because if you don't initiate things, if you don't do things towards the goal that you have in mind, then your want tos very quickly become the I wish I would have. I have sat at the bedside of many people who are in those last moments of their life. And Eric could tell you the same thing. Probably Logan could as well. Some of our deacons might even be able to tell you these stories where you sit there and in those last moments when things that are really, really important are talked about, nobody ever says, I wish I'd have spent more time at work. Nobody ever says, I wish I'd have spent more time pursuing the golden dream at the job or the career or whatever. Quite often what you hear is people who say, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. I wish I would have chosen better in the way I lived my life. I wish I wouldn't have wasted so many of my years of my life being, a goofball, partying, choosing the wrong paths, those kinds of things. It always comes back to, I really wanted to, but I never took the initiative to follow through. So back to this question of the snake charmer. I think what he's saying here is, what good is it to desire something or want to do something if you don't take the initiative to make it happen? Think of the snake charmer, typically from the Indian culture. We've seen those before, where the guy plays the flute and the little cobra dances and bobs and weaves, right? The first question that comes to my mind is, who's the idiot who first picked up a flute and said, hey, let's play it for the snake and see what happens, right? Second question is, what happens if he never plays the flute? You see, if he doesn't take the initiative, if he doesn't take the appropriate actions, he doesn't get the desired result. And as Solomon alludes to, a snake charmer who's dead is no good to anyone. So you've got to, at some point, take the initiative to do what leads you down your path to the dreams that God has given you. Verse 12, he says, the words from the mouth of a wise person are gracious, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words from his mouth is folly, but the end of his speaking is evil madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. No one knows what will happen, and who can tell anyone what will happen after him? You see, the wise man knows where he's going and how to get there. He knows where he's going and how to get there. So what does he do? Well, a wise man surrounds himself with wiser people. He surrounds himself with people who are going to encourage him in his journey, who are going to push him towards his destination, who are going to help him raise the bar in his own life, who are going to ask the big things out of him so he expects more of himself. In a sense, it's kind of this idea of accountability. Having people in your life who go, hey, Ridley, if you want to get here, don't you think you ought to do this? If you really want to raise a godly family, Ridley, shouldn't you do this as a father, as a husband? If you really want to pursue Christ with all of your heart, shouldn't you be doing this? The wise people surround the wise man and continue to push him on his journey. However, the fool surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear. It brings to mind the words of Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3, where he says something very, very similar. He says, for the time will come when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires will multiply the teachers around them for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. So the fool surrounds himself with yes men. Guys who just look at him and say, hey, you're doing good. You're doing all right. Everything's good. Everything checks out. It reminds me of the date night on Friday night. You know what I'm talking about? Where the wife comes in and says, honey, does this dress make me look fat? At that moment, the question is, does she want a yes man in her life? Does she want somebody's going to tell her what she wants to hear, or does she want the truth? Some of y'all are really uncomfortable right now because you've lived that moment, right? Well, you have to just look at your wife and go, you know what, baby, that's probably not the most flattering dress in the world. At which point she cries for about an hour and a half before she puts on the next dress, or the evening is canceled altogether. Or in that moment, do you look at your wife and say, baby, I think you look beautiful in whatever you're wearing. Amen. Burlap sack, whatever. You put it on and it looks good. It's the woman who makes the dress, right? Yeah. No, the truth is that the fool though, in reality, is willing to surround himself with people who are just going to tell him what he wants to hear. So they don't make him a better person. They just keep digging in his roots in the place where he is. His resolve never changes to be anything different. Verse 15. The struggles of fools weary them, for they don't know how to go to the city. You see, a fool walks and goes nowhere. He runs endlessly and never gains any ground. Why? Because he has no idea where he's going. He's set no agenda for himself. The wise person, however, he is able to endure difficulties, persecutions, trials, tribulations, because he has set his mind on a destination he knows is worth the journey. And because he knows where he's going and he knows he's worth it, then he's willing to go through whatever trial it takes to get there. He's willing to take on the challenges that might be resisting against him. Verse 16, he says, woe to you, land, where your king is a youth and your princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, land, where your king is a son of nobles and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. There's a time and a place to party, but the fool shows no boundaries. He doesn't know the right time and the right place. This is kind of alluding back to Ecclesiastes 3, where Solomon said, there is a time and a season to everything under heaven. There's a right time to do these things and a wrong time to do these things. If the prince is celebrating and feasting in the morning before noon, guess what? That means he's probably not doing his job as the ruler of his country. He's not taking care of business. But a king or a ruler who celebrates at night means he's probably done his work and he's got a reason to celebrate. He's got things to do around, or people around him to help celebrate the things he's done, the things he's accomplished. And in the eyes of God, there is a right time to celebrate the things in life. But you got to do the right things to get to that place. And this kind of leads into the next part of the conversation, verses 18 through 19. He says, because of laziness, the roof caves in. And because of negligent hands, the house leaks. A feast is prepared for laughter, and wine makes life happy. And all of you are going to underline this next verse. And money is the answer for everything. So let me clarify for you, that's not what he's talking about. He's not saying that money's going to make everything all right. Instead, it's almost like you have to read this verse backwards. He's saying that money has the ability to accomplish many things in life, which leads to a life that can be made happy, and also a feast that's prepared for the appropriate time for you to celebrate the things that you've accomplished. So money's not a bad thing, right? Nobody wants to condemn you for making your six-figure salary. Just write your tithe check, right? What you accomplish, what you succeed in life is all good. Celebrate those things in the right time. But take care of your responsibilities. Know the things that are yours to be done, things you should be doing, the things you should be accomplishing. Because going back to verse 18, laziness is a problem. Poverty is not a sin, laziness is. And see, we've got a misconception here in our country. We always equate poverty or poorness with the fact that somehow we've done something wrong against God and He's punishing us. And that's not true. The poor can be righteous just like the rich. The poor can be right in the middle of God's will just like the rich. The problem is laziness. And this is a really bizarre example. It's the only one I can think of, but it's really appropriate for Marshall County, so hang on with me, all right? You ever been riding down the road anywhere in rural areas, and you pass a house and do like me, you look at your wife and go, okay, at what point did that guy go, hey, baby, I'm going to put a washer and dryer in the front yard? And then 2 weeks later, he comes back and says, I think I'm going to put another washer and dryer in the front yard. And before it's over, you've got 15 pairs of washers and dryers in the front yard. Now, I don't fault them for that, because what I imagine is this guy one day came home and he said, baby, I'm really good with my hands. I think I want to be an appliance repairman. Can I just put the washer and dryer in the front yard till I get it working? And then laziness set in. And he brought in more and more and more, and then he became so lazy he didn't even want to take him back out of the yard when he realized I'm never going to be the appliance repairman I thought I was going to be, right? It's a bizarre example, but you see it happen all the time. For you, it may be your career. Maybe you said to your wife, hey, let's sell everything. Let's move to a smaller house because I'm going to start a job. We're going to start a new business, and I'm going to be this guy. And then laziness set in. Or you're in the house that you've been in for years, and your wife keeps saying to you, baby, that leaky roof is getting worse. And you keep going, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Now, we all see the practical reasons why that's a problem, right? But here's the spiritual reasons why that's a problem. Many of us take the same lazy approach to our relationship with God. God says, Ridley, this is an area in your life I need you to work on. And I go, got it, I'll get to it. Or God gives me this great idea for how I can minister to somebody else. And I go, yeah, I'm excited, let's go. And then suddenly I become lazy and drop the ball on it. And it never happens. We get all excited in our relationship with God many times because we have this really impactful moment, or we're in some really cool, worshipful environment, and we make some promise to God, and the next thing you know, we're sitting on the back row in the back pew. Again, nothing against you back row people right now. And you're going, hey, I thought it was a good idea, but it just never happened. Let's go and read verse 20, because I think this is where this comes into apply. He says, no, not in verse 20. It's the next portion. Let's do verse 20, though. It says, run your mouth and get busted. Do not curse the king, even in your thoughts. Do not curse a rich person, even in your bedroom. For a bird of the sky may carry the message, and a winged creature may report the nature. He's saying, keep your mouth under control. When you talk about people, guess what? They talk about you to the people they talk to, and those people talk to people, and eventually it comes back to the person you've been talking about. So you're better off just keeping your mouth quiet. It's better keep your thoughts to yourself. Don't run down other people, because guess what? It's going to eventually find its way back to them, and then you're going to create problems that you never wished you had. It's wiser just to keep your thoughts to yourself. Now to verses 1 through 6 of chapter 11, and this is where we'll wrap up for the day. He says, send your bread on the surface of the water, for after many days you may find it. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you don't know what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full, they will pour out rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or the north, the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. I think what he's trying to tell us here is that generosity always gets returned. So be generous with your kindness towards others. Be willing to do things for others. Be willing to help out your brother or sister or your neighbor. Your neighbor's barn burns down, go help him rebuild it, because the day yours burns down, he's going to come back and return that favor to you. Or he's going to be kind and gracious to you in your time of need, your hour of need. Now to verses 4 through 6, which is a continuation of this whole laziness thought. Because he says, one who watches the wind will not sow, and the one who looks at the clouds will not reap. Just as you don't know the path of the wind, or how bones develop in the womb of a pregnant woman, so also you don't know the work of God, who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening do not let your hand rest, because you don't know which will succeed, whether one or the other, or if both of them will be equally good. Solomon is saying, quit making excuses. Quit making your lame excuses about why you're not doing what you need to be doing and living a righteous life. The image he gives here is a farmer who goes out to sow his seed. Now, all of you who have ever done any farming or know anything about farming knows that there's a time to sow seeds and a time to reap the harvest, right? If you don't sow the seeds at the right time, the harvest never comes. So in this illustration, this example, what he's saying is the farmer goes out with his seed and he's getting ready to spread those seeds out, and he looks and he sees a cloud on the horizon and he says, looks like it might rain. I'll just go put the seeds away. I'll just go put them down. And so when the time for the harvest comes, there's nothing to show for it, because he let an excuse keep him from doing what he needed to do to be intentional to get the fruit he desired. Many of us in our own walks are that way with Christ when he says to you, I'm asking you to do this. I'm asking you to be obedient in this area. I'm asking you to follow through on this. I'm asking you to choose this path. And we get ready to start, but our response is, but God, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's out there. It's kind of scary what I see on the horizon. And God says, you know what? I own the horizon. I created that horizon. I know where you're going. You've got to trust me to do what I've asked you to do in this season. Because if you don't do what I ask you to do in this season, you're never going to know the harvest that's to come. If you're not willing to follow through on the things I ask you to do right now, you'll never experience the good, the blessing that will come out of those choices that I'm asking you to make. Quit making your lame excuses and be obedient in all seasons that I bring your way. So here's what I want to wrap up with today, just as a word that God has kind of encouraged my heart with this week. One of the things that we have been talking about in this season of blessing, as God has continued to bless us, is the fact that we want to stay on task with the mission that God has called us to. We're talking about a whole lot of different things now. A new building, how to make better space here in this building, how to plant churches here in Middle Tennessee and beyond, how to take the gospel beyond the Middle Tennessee area. We're praying and we're dreaming and visioning a whole lot of different things, right? Well, this week I was praying about that, and I honestly was praying, God, if this is going to happen, it's going to take a whole lot of finances to get this stuff done. You don't build buildings for free. You don't send missionaries for free. You don't do ministry for free. Where is this going to come from? And I felt like God was saying through some of the things that I was reading a very clear message. He was saying, I will take care of the finances. You quit worrying about that. You teach my people how to pray. Amen. And that's kind of where I am this morning, guys. I want to invite you to pray with me. Not just in this moment right here today, which we will do, but just turn our hearts towards the kind of prayer that changes things and changes us and changes the world. Prayer is not first and foremost about taking a laundry list to God and saying, here's what I need. It is instead going to God and saying, where are you working and how can I join you in it? What are you up to so I can be a part? And so I'm asking you as a congregation to pray with me about how do we keep sending people beyond these walls to take the gospel to the world? How do we make church multiplication, which is one of our values, how do we make it a reality? How do we make it go beyond just what we're doing here in this building and instead extend it to whatever place God takes us to as a congregation? How do we make best use of a skating rink and the multiple buildings that God's allowing us to use and the multiple parking lots that surround us? How do we make those things work so that we continue to focus on ministry and not focus on facilities? But that's going to require the prayer of God's people. Now here's what's really, really cool, because when God taught us to pray through his son Jesus, he said the prayer that's so familiar even to many non-believers. He said, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what Jesus was talking to his disciples about was the authority of God being extended to the corners of the earth. It's not a question of if that's going to happen. The question is, are you going to be a part of it? We sang that song, you're coming soon. We want you to come soon. We want to be ready. The way to be ready for God's coming is to be about his work in all areas of your life. And in order to do that, you've got to know where he wants you to be working. And in order to do that, we've got to be people of prayer. So that we don't get sidetracked by things that don't matter, so we don't get divided by issues that are unimportant, and instead, our focus is laser-like on what God has called us to do and what he's called us to be. Prayer changes things, but it starts by changing you and me. So now, will you join me as we pray? Father, we thank you for the wisdom of your book, specifically this book of Ecclesiastes and the words that have been shared by Solomon. Thank you for teaching us what truth really looks like in a world that's so full of what seems like meaningless things, meaningless moments, meaningless systems, meaningless values, and helping us to cling tightly to the things that really, really are important. We want to choose wisely, and that's not easy for us, Lord. We can't do it without you. We need your guidance. We need your direction. We need your grace and mercy over us. So as a church family, as a church body, Lord, would you show us what obedience really looks like? Not just this general vague idea of what it means to obey, but specifically in our lives day by day, what it means for us to be considered obedient disciples and followers of Christ. For some who are here this morning, this may be a challenging message because they feel like their lives better identify with the fool than they do the wise. The good news is it's not too late to make the right choice. It's not too late to make the right choice, to live surrendered to this Christ. In it is found the meaning and the purpose that we're looking for. Lord, would you continue to use this church in great ways for your glory? May we never come to the place where we elevate a man or a program or a ministry beyond the gospel. It's got to be about you, Father. It's never going to matter for any reason. So we want to continually exalt and lift you up. We want to worship you through the way we live our lives. We want the world to be drawn to you because of the way we choose to live. We want to love the world towards Christ and love them away from their sin. So show us how that works, Lord. Teach us and make us willing to hear. This morning, if there's someone who's ready to change the trajectory of their life, to change the direction of where they're headed, I pray that they would take those steps to begin that conversation. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. As we stand to sing, if God is speaking to you in any way this morning, I encourage you, come and pray at this altar. If you'd like to have a conversation or time of prayer, one of our staff are going to be available back there in the prayer and counseling room right here in the hallway. As the music begins to play, you feel free to move in whatever direction God is leading you this morning.
In the secret